In this video, we are going to cover how to use solubility rules. So you've learned about the idea of solubility and how some things dissolve, some things don't. Initially, we thought that all ionic compounds dissolved, but as time has gone on, we've realized some of them do not. So we're going to use solubility rules to help us know which kinds of things are going to dissolve and which kinds of things aren't. So in terms of ionic compounds, remember that we've got this Coulomb's law that we're focused on. Here is the mathematical expression of it, but remember that the two big ideas are the distance between the ions and the charge of the two ions. That's what's going to control how strongly those ionic compounds are held together, which means that's what's going to decide whether or not something is soluble in water. If it's soluble, that tells you that the lattice energy is weak. If it's not soluble, that tells you that the lattice energy is strong. And so in terms of lattice energy, remember that bigger charges are going to be a greater lattice energy, and a smaller distance, because this is in the denominator, a smaller distance between the two ions is going to be a greater lattice energy. So we kind of qualify those ideas in what we call solubility rules. So let's take a look at what the rules are. And I want you to notice that for most of the rules, can't quite see all of them here, but for most of the rules, they are based upon the anion. So you're going to look at the formula of the substance and you're going to focus on the anion first. The only rule that is a cation rule is rule number 1. So let's take a look at that first, and then we'll deal with the cation rules. So alkali metals and ammonium salts are soluble under all conditions, right? Common salts of hydrogen, sodium, potassium, ammonium, those are all alkali metals, ammonium, and so forth. So all of those things are soluble. So if you have sodium anything, it's going to dissolve. If you have ammonium anything, it's going to dissolve. So it doesn't matter what the anion is. If the cation is one of these guys, it's going to dissolve. For the anions now, the rest of the rules are anions. So there's going to be some exceptions for some of them. Acetates, carbonates, halogens, chromates, hydroxides, and so forth. You do not have to memorize these rules. You will always have access to them, but chances are you're going to learn some of them. For example, the nitrate rule. All nitrates are soluble. So whether it's calcium or iron or lead or sodium, it's going to be soluble. The others have exceptions, okay? So if we look at the halogens, most of them are going to be soluble except those of silver and lead, okay? So what that tells you is anything else, lithium chloride, calcium chloride, aluminum chloride, those things will dissolve in water. You put the solid in water and they disappear, they dissolve. However, if you try and put silver chloride in water or lead bromide in water, it's not going to dissolve. So be careful to make sure you always read the exceptions to the rules, because chances are you're going to need to apply an exception from time to time. And so if you don't read the whole rule, you're going to miss the ideas. So let's just do an example, okay? So let's say that we have barium hydroxide. Okay, well, barium is not part of rule 1, right? Because barium is not an alkali metal. Barium is an alkaline earth metal. So we're going to ignore rule 1, and then we're going to go to the hydroxide rule. Okay, so what's the hydroxide rule? Hydroxides are insoluble except those covered by rule 1. Calcium hydroxide, strontium hydroxide, and barium hydroxide are slightly soluble. So what does that mean for barium hydroxide, slightly soluble? So a small portion of it will dissolve, another portion of it won't. So chances are not all of this is going to dissolve. Unless you put a really tiny amount of barium hydroxide in water, chances are it's not going to dissolve. So slightly soluble means some of it will be dissolving, but not all of it. Okay, let's do one more just for the sake of looking. Okay, so let's go to sodium phosphate. Okay, so phosphate rule says phosphates are soluble except those covered by rule 1. Okay, so is sodium covered by rule 1? Is it one of the alkali metals? Oh, yes it is. Sodium is one of the alkali metals. So even though most phosphates are insoluble, sodium phosphate is soluble. So you will see it dissolve in water. The crystals will disappear when you put it in water. So that's how you use solubility rules. Again, you don't have to memorize them. You always have access to them, but you will learn some of them because you've used them so much.